Hello everyone. I welcome you all to the Foreign Trade Management course with Business School of Logistics and Shipping. I am Shivaranjini, Faculty for Foreign Trade Management. In this paper, I am going to take you through the concepts of foreign trade, parties involved in international trade transaction, global organizations who are monitoring the flow of trade, trade agreements and their types, barriers to trade, and how the foreign trade impacts the economy of a country, methods of payments in international transaction, international commercial terms, and much more. Let's get started. First, let us understand what do we mean by foreign trade. We all know there are different countries in the world, each having different culture, laws, regulations, capabilities, and resources. Due to such differences, every country is capable of producing only certain goods and services, and therefore it is not able to meet the needs and demands of its consumers. For example, country A, which is rich in agricultural resources, will be able to produce better agricultural products, whereas country B may be better at producing minerals and oils. Therefore, clearly, both the countries depend on each other to buy and sell the respective products in order to meet the requirements. This transaction and exchange of goods and services between two countries over international territories is referred as foreign trade. Foreign trade helps the countries to sell their products in the global markets. It helps the countries to satisfy and meet the needs and demands of its consumers. Also, it helps the countries to offer options and choices to its consumers. For example, a consumer in India can now choose between a German car, a Japanese car, or an Indian car due to foreign trade. Countries engage in buying and selling of products such as clothes, food, medicines, machines, etc., or services such as consulting, banking, tourism, transportation, and much more. A key point to note here is that countries not only engage in buying and selling of finished goods but also trade in intermediary goods, meaning raw materials which are used in the manufacturing processes. Manufacturers procure raw materials available at a cheaper price from the international market to be used in their manufacturing process and to complete the finished goods. Foreign trade therefore helps the countries to mutually benefit from each other and thereby contributing towards the economic growth and development. Foreign trade involves majorly two components, namely the imports and the exports. When a country is buying from the outside world, it is referred to as imports. On the other hand, when a country sells its products in the international market, it is referred to as exports. Now, let us understand the reasons for imports and exports by a country. First, let us look at the major reasons for imports. A country will import a product or a services from the outside world when they do not have the capabilities or the resources to produce or manufacture the said product or a service. Examples are specialized products, equipments, processes, or technology. The second reason a country may engage in an import is when they are producing the said product or a services, however, not in sufficient quantity so as to satisfy the needs and demands of its consumers. An example can be a country may be producing rice, however, not in sufficient quantity or volume so as to satisfy the demands of its people. In such a situation, although the country is producing rice, they may have to import it from the outside world to satisfy their consumers. The third reason a country may engage in an import is when they are able to identify the products or services available at a cheaper price in the international market. Example can be procuring raw materials from the international market where they are available at a cheaper price to be used in the manufacturing process, or outsourcing of business processes to places with availability of cheap labor. The last reason for a country to engage in an import activity is to offer options and choices to its consumers. Examples are the different brands that are available in watches, cars, bikes, phones, etc. Now let us look at the reasons for exports. Countries engage in export activity when they are producing or manufacturing products best in class as available in the international market. Examples may include specialized equipments, products, processes, technology, etc. The second reason a country may engage in an export process is when they are producing or manufacturing a product in surplus, meaning they are able to produce in such large quantities that they are able to satisfy the needs and demands of the local consumers and then also have excess which can be sold out in the international market. Examples are the OPEC nations who are able to produce and export oil to many different countries around the world. The next reason for a country to engage in an export activity is when they are able to identify huge demand for their products. Examples can be handicrafts, arts or artifacts. Over the years, factors such as globalization, industrialization, multinational companies and increased outsourcing activities has contributed to the increase in the scope of global trade. This transaction between the imports and exports is referred as EXIM. The EXIM activity of a country is measured using the balance of trade. The BOT is the difference between the value of exports and the value of imports. By value, we mean the monetary value of all the goods and services that have been exported or imported by a country over a specified period of time. In simple words, the BOT represents how much a country has sold or bought from the outside world. Let us understand this with an example. Let us assume country A is exporting rice, pulses and minerals over a period of 1 year. Let us assume that country A has exported rice for a value of about $5 million, pulses for a value of about $2 million and machines for a value of about $3 million. Therefore, the total value of exports for country A in 1 year equals to $10 million. Now, at the same time, country A will also be importing certain products from the outside world. Let us assume country A is importing cotton, cars and coffee. They have imported cars for a value of about $3 million, cotton for a value of about $2 million and coffee for a value of about $2 million. Therefore, the total value of imports for country A over a period of 1 year equals to $7 million. In this case, the balance of trade hence becomes value of exports minus value of imports, which is $10 million minus $7 million, which is equal to $3 million. This represents the BOT of country A in a period of 1 year. The balance of trade can be positive or negative. A positive BOT is referred as a trade surplus, while a negative BOT is referred as a trade deficit. Let us understand this through a representation. At any given point in time, a country has both imports and exports. When a country exports its products or sells its products in the outside market, it earns money or it earns foreign exchange. At the same time, whenever a country is importing or buying products from the outside market, they have to spend money or spend foreign exchange. This value difference between imports and exports is referred as balance of trade. If the country's imports are higher than the exports, that is, the country has been buying more, which means they have spent more money, it referred as trade deficit and is represented as negative balance of trade. On the other hand, if a country has more exports, which means they have sold more to the outside world and earned more money in turn, it is referred as trade surplus and is represented as a positive balance of trade. Ideally, countries wish to maintain a positive balance of trade as it helps them to earn more foreign exchange. The balance of trade is also a key determinant of the economic activity of a country, as it is one of the key components of the GDP, gross domestic product. GDP represents the economic health of a country. It is also used to determine the size and growth of economy of a country. GDP as a tool is used by the policymakers, investors and businesses to make strategic decisions. The formula for GDP is private consumption plus government investment plus government spending plus gross investment plus the balance of trade, which is the difference between value of exports minus value of imports. And hence we can see how foreign trade has a direct impact on the economy of a country. A trade surplus, that is a positive balance of trade, represents a higher GDP, whereas a trade deficit, that is a negative balance of trade, represents a lower GDP. Now let's look at the benefits of foreign trade. Foreign trade enables countries to sell their products in the outside world, earn foreign exchange and thereby contribute towards economic growth and development. It also helps countries in achieving economic efficiency and productivity. Foreign trade enables countries to provide more options to its consumers and thereby satisfying consumer demands and needs. Foreign trade also increases the employment opportunities within a country, as to produce more products you need more people. Finally, foreign trade also helps countries in adapting new technology and processes and keep up to date with the market. As we have seen, foreign trade involves countries with different rules, regulations and laws. It is a complex process. Also, the distance between the countries increases the risks in the business. Therefore, in order to bring stability and to define the terms of trade, countries enter into certain contractual agreements known as the trade agreements. Trade agreements outline the terms and conditions of conducting business between the nations. Trade agreements help to reduce the risks and misunderstandings amongst the member nations. Trade agreements aim to establish a safe and smooth flow of business transaction. Also, trade agreements provide a scope for dispute resolution which may arise during the course of business transaction. Therefore, trade agreements help to increase confidence between the parties engaged and thereby enhance the economic cooperation and integration between the countries. As we can see, there are two countries, country A and country B. In both the countries, there are a set of sellers and buyers. The sellers are represented by the letter S and the buyers are represented by the letter B. Trade agreements aim to enable easy and safe business transactions between both the countries. The sellers are known as exporters and the buyers are known as importers. Ideally, countries prefer a free flow of goods and services between their borders. However, to avoid certain situations and risks, countries tend to impose restrictions or obstacles in the forms of tariffs, quotas, etc., which basically prevents the free flow of trade between them. The most common types of trade agreements are the free trade agreement and the preferential trade agreement. A free trade agreement enables the countries to abolish the trade restrictions in the form of tariffs and quotas applicable on the products being traded between them. On the other hand, a preferential trade agreement does not allow the countries to abolish the restrictions, however, enables them to lower the tariffs or quotas as applicable on the products that are being traded. Depending on the number of countries participating, trade agreements are broadly classified as bilateral and multilateral. When two countries engage in a trade agreement, it is referred as a bilateral trade agreement. Examples are India-Japan and India-Sri Lanka. On the other hand, when there are more than two countries involved in a trade agreement, it is referred to as a multilateral trade agreement. Examples are ASEAN constituting 7 member countries and SAARC constituting 10 member countries. Let us see an example of the trade agreement between India and Japan and see the objectives. The objectives of this trade agreement are to liberalize and facilitate trade in goods and services between the parties, increase investment opportunities, ensure protection of intellectual property and promote cooperation in the field thereof, promote cooperation for the effective enforcement of competition laws in each party, improve business environment in each party, establish a framework to enhance closer cooperation in the fields of agreed in this agreement, create effective procedures for the implementation and application of this agreement and for the resolution of disputes. As we can see here, trade agreement does not only speak about trading of goods and services but also encompasses growth and development in many other fields such as investment opportunities, intellectual property, business environment, also covering resolution of disputes. So it provides a comprehensive framework of doing business for the countries with each other. As much as governments encourage foreign trade for the mutual benefit, growth and development, it is also their responsibility to protect and promote the domestic markets. Allowing more foreign products into the country can destroy the domestic markets. Also, as government continues to buy products or import products from the outside world, their spending also increases. Therefore, to protect the local markets from such threats and to cut down on the money spent due to imports, government imposes certain restrictions and obstacles on the free flow of trade. These restrictions or obstacles are referred as trade barriers. Certain trade barriers used by the government to control the flow of trade are tariffs, non-tariffs, quotas, anti-dumping duties, embargoes and sanctions. Let us understand each one of them. The first trade barrier that we are going to discuss are called as tariffs. Tariffs are taxes that are imposed by the government on the products being imported into the country. Tariffs tend to increase the price of the product and thereby reducing its sales in the domestic market. When the cost of the product goes high, the number of people buying the product goes down. We can see this in the higher prices of the imported cars and bikes that are available in the market. This is because of the tariffs that are imposed by the government on the prices of these bikes and cars, which ultimately makes the overall cost of the products higher. Due to such high costs, many consumers prefer to buy from the domestic players. Therefore, we can see how government uses tariff as a trade barrier to protect the domestic players. The next type of trade barrier are called as non-tariffs. Non-tariffs do not impose any kind of taxes on the products that are being imported. However, they do specify certain qualitative criteria such as technical specifications, color, size, testing, certifications, rules of origin, etc. Products which conform to such qualitative criteria are only allowed to be imported into the country while the others are rejected. One of the forms of non-tariff trade barriers used by the governments are called as subsidies. Subsidies are benefits or incentives that are offered by the government to the domestic players in the form of low interest loans, financial assistance or tax benefits to help them keep their prices competitive in the domestic markets. The next trade barrier that we are going to discuss are called as quotas. Quotas do not impose any tariffs on the products and services that are being imported or exported out of a country. However, quotas do limit the quantity or sometimes the value of the goods and services that are being traded. Government imposes quotas to reduce the quantity of competitive products in the local markets and thereby increasing the demand for the domestic goods and services. Quotas are more effective as a trade barrier than tariffs in case the demand for a product is not price sensitive in the local markets. Example, India has import quota on pulses and US has quota on sugars. To protect the domestic players and the markets from the threat of foreign trade, governments use another effective trade barrier called as the anti-dumping duty. To understand the anti-dumping duty, first let us understand the process of dumping. Sometimes manufacturers in one country try to sell their products in another country at a much lower price than the normal price that is available in the other country. Example, let us assume the price of a product is $3 in country A. But when country B tries to sell the same product for $1 in country A, then such a practice is called as dumping. Manufacturers engage in the act of dumping to increase their product market share in the foreign territories and also to drive out local competition. To counter such practices, governments impose the anti-dumping duty on the imported products. An example here would be when the Chinese steel manufacturers try to sell their steel at a much lower price in the US domestic markets, causing damage of business to the domestic steel manufacturers. Upon representation by the domestic steel manufacturers, the US government then imposed high anti-dumping duties ranging between 200% to 500% on the imported steel from China. By doing so, the government could safeguard and protect the domestic steel manufacturers in the US. Now let us discuss embargoes and sanctions. Embargoes and sanctions are political trade restrictions put in place against a country with an aim to maintain and restore international peace and security. Embargoes are barriers which completely ban or prohibit any kind of trade between two countries. Sanctions, on the other hand, do not completely ban, however, prohibit trade in certain areas of goods, services or technology depending on various reasons. Finally, let's look at the benefits of trade barriers. By imposing trade barriers, governments are able to protect the local and the domestic markets. By imposing trade barriers, governments are able to restrict imports and thereby also restrict the flow of foreign exchange out of the country. Government is able to monetize more revenues by imposing duties and taxes on imports. Government is also able to protect the country from dumping practices. And finally, by promoting more domestic production, government is able to make a strong and efficient economy. With this, we come to the conclusion of this topic and I shall see you in the next.